Hi, my name is Marie Pampanin, and I am your host of Yoga Therapy, the Alchemy of Healing. If you enjoy the subject matter or know somebody that might, please pass on our links as well as hitting the like and or subscribe button. Maybe even show us a little bit of extra love and do both. Thank you so much.
Hello, and thank you for coming to join me today. I would like to introduce Charlene Muhammad. She is a certified yoga therapist and a licensed dietitian, and Dr. Marilyn Peppers-Citizen, who's also a certified yoga therapist. And this is a real big treat for me because, Marilyn, you were one of my teachers. Thank you so much for joining me today and discussing yoga therapy. Um, as I shared earlier, that I have this vision that we can hopefully help to share what yoga therapy is to the different communities out there. But specifically today, not only are we going to be talking about yoga therapy and what yoga therapy is, but you two have written a book. So super excited to touch on that. Yoga therapy, no, excuse me, yoga in the Black community. So hopefully we can interweave that. I would show a picture of the book. Do either one of you have it close by? The book?
I
Mine
do
is
have
on
my
Kindle.
I have my own copy, so it has a heart on
Yes,
it.
yes, yes, yes. Look at that. Wonderful. Yeah. And I have been going through it. I haven't quite made it all the way through to the end, but for those of you that are interested in this book so far, amazing, awesome. 2 thumbs up, 5 stars.
Thank you.
So I thought maybe what we can do to start off is if both of you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about your history with yoga and your road to becoming a yoga therapist. Charlene, would you like to start?
That's usually easy, other than we both jump in right there.
Yeah.
So for my own personal yoga journey, I was introduced to yoga. I had the great privilege of being introduced to yoga through my mom. And so this was early in the 1980s. And so this is when yoga was not necessarily a popular venture for Black yoga folks back in the day. And my mom introduced me to yoga, and it was through Integral Yoga. So that was the yoga center in New York City where I was living at the time. And mom brought me there. And so my introduction to yoga was not a hatha yoga practice per se, but more of a yoga meditation and yoga mantra through that perspective. And but I fell in love with it. So from coming into yoga in that way, and my mom just noticing back in the 80s, we weren't talking about stress at the time, but she recognized that her daughter was a little stressed. Now we know what the term was. And so she introduced me to yoga. I continued to practice yoga from that time, morphing me over to my life in Seattle, where I settled and had my sons, and continued having a yoga practice that also sort of blossomed out to having a wellness practice overall. We didn't call it that in the day, but just finding other means of finding ways to support my young family with a more holistic way of living through nutrition, herbs, and yoga practices itself. So that's what brought me into a yoga practice.
And for me, I was introduced to yoga in the mid 90s. I was in the midst of a career in the military, so I was on active duty at the time. And a friend introduced me to the practice. Initially, it was a hatha practice, but what I later discovered was that there was a parallel path that just seemed to work for me. Kind of found my way here on my own, but it was that my own spiritual practice that I had before coming into the military just aligned with what I learned philosophically about yoga. And so periodically I would teach while I was on active duty when I was in places where I had the opportunity to do that. And then after I retired in 2010, started to pay a little bit more attention to it, studied a little bit more in depth. And like Charlene, it was a holistic program for me, even though I didn't call it a wellness program or any of that lifestyle terms that we use now, but I integrated yoga, studied with the Integrative Institute of Nutrition in New York City in about 2014, and then just kind of blended those two together. And so those paths just kind of melded in.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. It's interesting. So, Charlie, listening to you, you brought up the word stress, right? And so I thought maybe we can just kind of tease that out a little bit in terms of stress, yoga therapy, maybe even, going into the world of the Black community and how stress affects the Black community.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I'm a little older than you are. And so think about my lifestyle as my life. So I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. And if you think about what was happening as far as civil rights during that particular period of time that I was growing up. And then again, we have more language for it today than what I was actually, my lived experience, so to speak. And so my mom, fortunately, my parents were very cognizant of that time period. So we were actively involved in that time, and yet there was not a lot of language around stress and trauma, so to speak, although that's what we were experiencing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents, because they were more of the creative arts, so to speak, there was a movement towards using that to support the overall emotional experiences that we were experiencing during that civil rights movement. That's the best way I can explain it in today's terminology, because back then we weren't thinking about it in the terms that we have today. But there definitely was a need to address those experiences and the impact that they were having on our lives. And I think that when Marilyn and I ventured on this journey of writing this book, those were sort of the memories that I had that sort of helped to support aspects of what we were researching at the time to then address those things, because there were very very innate practices that we had as a community that we were using in order to support us through those particular processes. And then with my mom, dovetailing that to something like a yoga practice, we could begin to see the alignment of those particular practices to codify it and be more formal and intentional in how we supported the community.
Yeah. One of the things that I heard you speak into in a separate interview is that you were actually referring to the embodiment of the certain practices and dancing and plant medicine and chanting. And I felt like when I heard that, that resonated just within my heart and soul so much that, this crossing over of these beautiful pieces of yoga and how we embody things and how we express and how trauma gets stuck in the body and how do we get that trauma back out. And sometimes it's not in words.
Right.
Sometimes it has to be through movement. It has to be through art. And I believe your mother was a dancer. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So to be able to, transform that trauma, is just, it's a beautiful thing. And reading it and hearing it was really exciting. So, which leads me down to you, Marilyn, because one of the things that you brought up was spirituality, and with yoga, I've said this before in different podcasts, but we have, yoga means union, and with yoga therapy, we're looking at the different koshas. And so the spiritual aspect of what yoga brings to us, which you found in your journey, or at least connected to, I should say, in your journey.
Right. Yes, it was an understanding that there was so much more beyond just me, but that I was part of everything. And being in the military, the jobs that I had, death and the end of life was also very near and something that was discussed quite often. And so to be able to find a way to do what I needed to do, I tapped into my own spirituality frequently, sometimes on a day-to-day basis, and just being able to connect that. So the introduction of yoga and the innateness of being able to connect with self and understanding that we are all connected in a sense was just it just worked. And as I look at our community, that is something that African people have believed for centuries, is that there's no separation between body and mind. And so it was a way to really be able to navigate difficult situations as I needed to. And to your point, Marie, really understanding that when there is challenge and stress, to be able to find a way to let it move through us
Mm.
rather than being held by us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's beautifully stated. Um, but also the support, whether it's to a higher power or within our communities or within other people. Again, one of the things that I did hear, and I'm not sure who actually referred to this during the Shannon Stott interview, is that, we're also good at going hard and doing and pushing past things and not necessarily connecting back into the things where rest, the connection, releasing the trauma through breath or poses, right? So I was hoping that you guys can help to explore that a little bit and how yoga therapy opens that up to your community and other communities as well.
Yeah, I'm going to toss that to Marilyn because she often speaks about the sojourner syndrome. And so maybe you can sort of unpack that a little bit.
Yes, Sojourner Truth um, was a really famous woman who help enslaved people to escape. And so the syndrome itself, particularly in Black women, is this effort to constantly work your way through whatever presents itself. No matter how difficult the task, you're going to get through it. No matter how challenging the relationship, you're going to hold things together yourself and get through it. So it's really this constant um, this constant pushing without taking the time to like reevaluate, to take care of self. And over time, this weathering, the term weathering, it builds. And
Hmm.
so years of carrying everything on your shoulders, like nobody else can fix Thanksgiving dinner like I can. So I need to carry the burden of it all. But to get to a place where really, when I think about it from a yogic perspective, is drawing others in. So it's almost like if you have to do Thanksgiving dinner yourself, we're cheating others from the opportunity to feel the joy that we might feel if you like to cook,
Yeah.
for preparing the dinner yourself. And at the same time, giving yourself time to enjoy and be present and taking it in. So it's that um, getting past having to do everything yourself and not feeling guilty
Hmm.
about self-care, about caring for yourself. And I just recall, this constant reminder of, taking an airplane trip where the attendants tell you to put your own oxygen mask on so that you can take care of others. So, that's another really good reminder of a way to deal with that syndrome.
And I would
Right.
just say, what's really interesting is that we've had a good example of that just recently. So during this election period and the level of Black women who elevated themselves to come behind Kamala Harris in particular, and then having the disappointment of not having her, the election result not being where she is. So regardless of where you are in your politics, but the fact that Black women after that election said, we are tired, of carrying the burden of supporting, the overall results of what happens in this country. And that resonated with me loud and clear. Like, wow, that was a great example of what the Sojourner syndrome is that women, Black women in particular, felt the necessity to step up and then to feel the burden of that result, that they were trying to carry and support this, the particular overall, society itself, that they felt that particular burden. And I think that that's something that Black women, all women, I just think Black women have a language for it, that women feel that they're carrying they're carrying society because we're the caregivers, we're the parents, we're the mothers, and that they had that language to say that.
Yeah.
And that burden was atop all of the burdens that they were already carrying.
Right.
So we don't let go of anything. We just continue to add to it.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the stacking. When I started over at Maryland University of Integrative Health, I want to say it's either the first or the second semester, but I'm pretty sure it was the first semester, I learned a term, allostatic load.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was an amazing thing for me to learn that term because there was a science behind what it was that I was feeling in my body. And, and it is a lot of that caregiving. I'm 56. I've, been in a marriage, raised my children, have grandchildren, just took them on a trip, and just that. And that's not even going outside of my own life. That's just my life, right? But now with yoga therapy, having the tools to kind of manage it a little bit better when I start to feel that load get a little heavy.
Yeah. It's so good to have the language. What I'm so impressed with right now is that we are finding the language to articulate the emotional responses that we're having. So for generations, that hasn't been that way, right? So for generations, we've been compiling these emotional experiences and traumas that have been now manifesting on a mental health level because we've been suppressing these things. And that if we go back to this whole concept of yoga philosophy, and the practice of yoga, it really is to be introspective so that we can begin to investigate and explore these feelings that we're having and begin to recognize that they are experiences that we're having, but they don't necessarily define who we are. And that I see is really what's key to yoga therapy practice, is to get back to those particular points where we can support people in having that experience themselves.
Absolutely.
And to add to Charlene's comment, also important to recognize the experiences that we're having, to understand them, to be present in them, and yet not lose sight of the work that still needs to be done, but being able to be buttressed in a way that you can continue the work that you need to do and sustain yourself through that work.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Um, in your book, Yoga for the Black Community, is there anything that you would like to cross-reference while we're here talking about allostatic load, trauma, and how we experience trauma?
Well, one thing that came to mind as I was listening to the conversation, I was reminded that there was one fact that I unearthed that was new to me. Well, there was a lot that was new to me, but that Black women are, according to this one study, 7.5 years older than white women based on our telomeres. And it is from that continued stress, generational stress and trauma that we're dealing with. And I thought about that. Can you imagine just being born and already being 7 years older than where you should be, just because of what you had to bear?
Yeah. So I know what telomeres are. Could you maybe just kind of speak a little bit into what the telomeres are so that way somebody who's like, what's a telomere?
And not a neuroscientist here, but the end of the DNA that is a marker for aging.
Yeah.
And so
And that's
you want them to be longer, not shorter.
shorter.
Right.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing about what Marilyn is sharing is that then there's also research around how we can increase our longevity through various aspects of the yoga practice, right? So various aspects of meditation and pranayama, which is the breathing practices that can support the longevity, as because it decreases the stress response, the allostatic load in the body. And once we can decrease those allostatic loads, then we're able to move on to some of the other principles of yoga, where we can begin to work on deepening our concentration. We can begin to define what our dharma is, what is our purpose in life, right? Yeah. So all of the yoga principles and practices that we do on a physical level, the different layers of physical practice itself, right? It's not only talking about hatha yoga, the physical movement of the body, pranayama, the breathing practices of the body, the meditation, dharana, meditative practices. So all of those are sort of on that beginning physical level. But once we can begin to become more intentional in our yoga practice, of getting ourselves out of our here and into here, then we can begin the true journey towards healing. It's all towards healing, but that's how we get there.
Yeah. The healing, the finding resilience. Yeah, absolutely. How do you see those components that you just spoke into in terms of yoga in the Black community? How does that help to foster wellness?
In every community, regardless of whether you are an African American or any indigenous people on the earth, we've all been given a healing practice. We all have one, regardless of where you're on the planet, because that's the beauty of nature, that nature gives us this way to attune to who we truly are. And so for Blacks in America, we've been robbed of because we were enslaved. And so Marilyn and I, our work and our initial research is to go back to and to reawaken those particular practices within our community, so that we have a reminder that these things are innate within us. And so it's that awakening that happens. Some particular communities or cultures, they naturally have that because they haven't been robbed of that. So it's already within their cultures, it's already within their traditions. So for Blacks in America, that's something that we have to reawaken, to remind us that we have these things. And healing is natural, healing is innate, it's within us, and it just needs to be awakened. That's the beauty of the yoga practice, because that's the goal. It's to awaken what we already have within ourselves. And so in writing Yoga in the Black community, it's a reminder that these things are already within our culture. It's already within our traditions. So let's go back and look at what those traditions are and reawaken those, so that we can begin to recultivate this healing that we all need, regardless of who we are. We all need it.
And we felt that it was very important to recognize what reality is. And the reality of our circumstances are heavy to bear. One of the authors that we looked at, Fanny Brewster, actually talked about the fact that we as Black Americans need to revisit the African Holocaust as much as we can handle, as often as we can handle, so that we don't lose sight of who we are. But our book talks about this nature, this part of us that was lost, and reawaken. I like to say reclaiming it. And so it's part of re-education as well, to recognize that this is in, and it's not new. It's not new. The philosophies, mind body connection, that is not new to our people. But the question is, do we realize that it's not new to us, that it is us, and that we can find this parallel path between connecting with our history, our ancestry, our ancestors, and the yogic practice, that like there's no disconnect there, and is to be able to recognize it and to reclaim it. It has never been taken away from us, despite the fact that there were definite actions to strip us from that, and that we didn't have generations of families here that we could hold on to that, so it was stripped away. But just because that was stripped away didn't mean that you could change who we are inside. Like, nobody can do that. Nobody can take that away from us. So it's, how do you reconnect? How do you reclaim what is always there?
That's very powerful. That's very powerful. I just kept going back to the root chakra.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As I was listening to both of you, that center point.
And you think about, and the root chakra is really in yoga therapy, where more than likely that's where we go to begin all of our healing practices, right?
Yes.
Because it's always, what is the root cause of whatever is manifesting in the body?
Yeah. So as you were writing the book and you were going through the history and how yoga interacts, there's a point in the book where you have this template where you're showing what the pieces of yoga and Christianity and Muslim religion, how there's these pieces that kind of start to come together that overlap. Would you like to speak into that, either one of you? Because I think that's an important piece of why yoga works.
Well, we began that because of this question of within that happens within the Black community. Maybe it happens in other communities about, is yoga a religion? And so we wanted to, in that particular section, to say, this is a philosophy and a foundation that is universal. And so we chose those three particular universal practices that are predominant in the Black community. So we know that there are many, yet we chose we tried to pick Christianity, Islam, and then Black nationalism. So Kwanzaa, that's what we did.
Yeah, that's right.
And to
I forgot about that
show,
one. Yeah.
just to show that, yoga is there are universal principles that are aligned with the universal principles of what are typically practiced within the Black community, knowing that, that there are many, many. I mean, when we say that, and we often have this conversation, people are coming at me, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? Well, yeah, there are many, but these were, we thought that were pretty foundational, that we could show how yoga was aligned with these particular practices. Yoga is a universal philosophical, spiritual practice of what it means to be human. How does it align across other similar practices? That is my definition. What do you think, Marilyn?
I agree with that. And it brings to mind a comment that I read somewhere, so I'm not sure who to attribute this to, but that in some cases, adhering to this yogic philosophy can enable a person to even be better at whatever their spiritual practice is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are amazing tools, techniques, intentions, thought processes, meditations, contemplations, daily practices that can only make us better people. It's what it means. What does it mean to be human?
Mm-hmm.
How do I care for myself? How do I
and others?
And how do I interact with others, treat others? Universal.
Right. How do we build community?
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was definitely one of the pieces that resonated with me when I was going through school. And I do, notice it within my own clients and when I'm teaching. It's like, how do we build that community? How do we help each other to find that support network? Because it is part of what we need to be able to survive.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just this lone island, right? When somebody comes knocking at your door and says, I'm interested in yoga therapy. And even though you did a beautiful job of, going through and talking about why it's important, how would you describe to, say, a new client or someone who's interested, what they might see in a yoga therapy setting?
Well, I think for me, one of the first questions I would ask would be what that individual's understanding was, and then to go from there, but to also ask what their desire is, like what's important to you.
Yeah.
And then explain how this practice of yoga therapy could support them in reaching what they hope to reach. And also explaining and recognizing, acknowledging that each of us is so much more than what we present.
Yeah.
Most clients that come to me are coming for a physical manifestation of pain or trauma. Mm-hmm. And so they've heard that yoga is something that can help them. And so that's fine. And so I meet them where they're at, and yet I am hoping that they will explore a deeper understanding of themselves over time. And so I explain it in that way that, we can certainly meet you for your knee pain, and yet that I've been having this knee pain for years, and someone told me that yoga is the way that can support that. And so we can explore it. I meet them where they're at, coming from that outer layer, and working our way through the koshas in that particular, not that I have that conversation with them, but that's what I try to guide my clients through. So guiding them through this outer layer of what's happening in their physical body so that they can ultimately get deeper inside of themselves to get to the root cause, just like we had talked about earlier. So we can get to the root cause of what's going on. But I have to meet my clients where they're at. And usually they come to me because they have some kind of physical chronic pain. And someone has told them, before you go to surgery, try yoga therapy. Not that I'm a surgeon, but I'm just saying to you that that's usually what it is. It's like, okay, I've tried every possible physical thing. I'm told yoga might be able to help me. And so my goal then is okay, if someone is meeting me at that point, I'm hoping that they can get a deeper experience of what's actually at the root cause of what's going on with them, and that we can be on this journey to get to that point.
Right. It's interesting that you brought up chronic pain, because one of the things that I found is that a lot of individuals don't necessarily understand the impact of chronic pain, how it affects them mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And that's, again, one of the things that has really led me to be such a proponent of yoga therapy, because we get to help support them in all of those different areas. When it comes to the Black community specifically, are you finding that more awareness is coming to what yoga can help create in terms of balance in somebody's life?
For me, it goes back to that statement that I made by understanding the person's reason for being there, their why. And they may not realize that. I'd say in most cases they don't. But that's okay too. That's okay. That is how they present that day. And often without explaining all of that initially, it is to help the individual experience how they present in a different way, to recognize it, and then you can grow from there. You can bring in different coaches like in the first session without going into depth, but to let them experience something that they haven't experienced before. And then I find that there is then a level of curiosity. I even had a client once before say, I've never felt my heartbeat. I felt my heartbeat today. And, and then this excitement grows from there. But I find with the clients that I work with that I start at the level that they present with that day and then go from there. But always recognizing that they are so much more than what they ask for help with.
Yeah. I'm right there with you on that one. One of the reasons I asked is because I've also found, just straight across the board, through different populations, that yoga is perceived as this either Indian religion, right? Or this westernized, Lululemon, pretzel, right? And so for me personally, there's been a lot of, and this is kind of funny to me because I live in an area that, tends to be a little bit more open and creative in terms of what kind of things they're doing for healing processes. And so when I hear the word woohoo, It's like, what's that crazy, hoo-hoo thing you're doing over there? It's like, well, it's called yoga therapy.
Well, I also think this is the a good I don't want to argue, I would say argument or a good justification of why we need to have more yoga therapists who reflect their community. It is easier for myself to come into my community. I know the culture, I know the language, and I can articulate yoga philosophy within my culture so that it becomes something that's more accessible to the folks that I'm trying to work with, right? And not to say that others who are not Black cannot come into the Black community. I say all that to say to who's ever listened to this podcast that you need to be able to understand the culture that you're striving to approach and to support so that you can put down those barriers in order for them to be receptive to what you're offering. I've had a lot of arms crossed to say, I don't want to hear that, yoga's against my religion. I've heard that many, many times. And so I have to come in with a understanding that is a barrier within my community, and then be able to then offer this beautiful practice in ways that are more subtle. And then once it's accepted, then I can begin to deepen the understanding and the practices and adding more and more and more. So, but that's not any different than allopathic medicine. It really is not, right? So you're coming into the doctors and you're like, I don't want to hear it, right? So a good doctor, a good allopathic doctor can explain the treatment practice that they want to give in order to make that receptive. We just went through this with COVID, right? Where there was so much trepidation and conspiracy around different treatment practice and what it is and what it's not, and people had their arms crossed and don't come to me with the. So we had a wonderful example of that during COVID. So we can see that there's still a lot of stereotypes and a lot of fear and animosity and distrust. And so how do we, and that's just, we have to break all of those down in a variety of different ways. And believe it or not, yoga therapy is one of the best practices to do that because it's such a approachable practice. It's something that's so individual for folks. It's something that there's immediate, an immediate feeling of relief. There's an immediate response that is of healing that can be much more acceptable to help people bring it down. But I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox.
And I would add to that, to share a practice in a subtle way, but you still, to be effective for any of us, we need to honor whatever that person's beliefs are. And if we aren't careful, it is very easy to feel and sense when someone is not connecting with you, or that is talking down to you, or that doesn't have the history that you have. Right. And so it's important to be able to honor that person so that they can get there where they can experience that first gift of yoga therapy.
Right. And one of the words that Charlene, you used was accessible. It is accessible. And, if we peel back, the philosophy of it and kind of go to, specifics of what we're doing, the breath work from a Western perspective, right? From the medical Western perspective, it is helping with the energetics of the body. It's helping to calm the nervous system. When we're looking at, the poses. The poses are there to, again, from the Western perspective, help us to find more strength, flexibility, ease in our body, right? The mental piece of it, you know, just we're not therapists, but as we help people to, move into the space of their own self-reflection, their purpose, what it is that they need, again, there is the philosophical piece that we can actually point to, but then there's just, as you said, that accessibility to why. Because I do think a lot of people come in to see, say, a yoga therapist, and they don't know why. They don't know why they have pain. They don't know why they feel the way they do. They don't know why, they're having heart palpitations, right? And, going back to what you said earlier, is that we, as Marilyn also said, is that we can come in and have this amazing experience of being able to meet them where they're at. And it's not about religion. It is about, is that exactly what you said earlier, Charlene, is that we get to accessibly move through the barriers and help them, Marilyn, to meet where they're at. So that way they can start to go a little bit deeper from the outside in some cases inside out, but from the, and figure out what it is that they need for themselves when they need to rest, when they need to breathe, when they need to reach out for support.
And I think that's a key element too, Marie, is to shine the light on how they help themselves.
Yes, I love
how they have the tools to be able to decide when this is happening, this is what I do.
Yes.
When this is taking place, this is what I do.
Yes.
It's empowering folks to go back to their own healing.
Mm-hmm.
That healing is self-empowerment. And as yoga therapists, we've been blessed with the knowledge, understanding, and ultimately, if we practice for a while, some level of wisdom to be able to be stewards to supporting folks into finding their own self-empowerment, and serving as a reminder that these are innate, as Marilyn said earlier, this is innate within them.
Yes. Absolutely. I want to thank both of you for coming on and joining me. I know that somebody has a class to go to, so staying in that timely manner. Could you both please let everybody know where they can find you? It's going to be also in the show notes, but just so.
Yoga in the Black Community. You can find it like in your major bookstores. I have my own website that's under construction, but it's up, The Dimensions of Wellness. And still at Maryland University of Integrative Health. What a privilege to be able to work with up and coming yoga therapists.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And again, Yoga in the Black Community can find us. And hopefully in 2025, Marilyn and I will have that website up, Yoga in the Black Community. And in the meantime, you can find me at urbanherbalist.org. Also a graduate of Maryland University of Integrative Health back in the day.
We're excited about the new Yoga in the Black Community website, though.
Yes, we are. Yes.
We're excited about that.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that too. So thank you so much for my
Thank you so much, Marie. This was beautiful.
Thanks for having us. So good.
Yeah, and thank you for your practice, and thank you for continuing the yoga therapy journey, and just moving us. We're the pioneers of this work, and I'm so appreciative that you have joined the ranks of us pioneers moving this forward.
And codifying the conversations.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us today. If you would like to support this content, hit the like button, subscribe, or leave a comment. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a fabulous day.